Hi guys, welcome to the live. We still have a couple of minutes before we begin with today's live. I'm really excited for today's live because today my throat is not bad. It's actually pretty okay, and I'm able to talk normally now. So hopefully today's live will be way more lively than last live. And also, I decided to do this live in the morning because evenings are extremely tiring. They feel extremely tiring. So I thought I'll just do it in the morning when I'm still fresh and not at all exhausted by all the work that's been done in the day. So here I am at 11. I hope my voice is audible. Let me know if it is not. I'll be starting now. I've kept my phone in front of me here as the second screen so that I'm able to look at the comments just in case if there are any. So let's begin. I actually wanted to begin with the Who Am I section. Okay, let me just check if the feed is going okay. If everything looks fine. So far, it is looking okay. Perfect. Just give me one moment and I'll begin my presentation. Awesome. So we have a couple of people here. Do comment and let me know who all are your favorite characters and why are they your favorite characters? Because I'd love to know who has left a good impression on you all. So let's begin with today's session with Who Am I? So, uh, one second. Okay. My name is Heena and I'm a developmental editor. I have been editing for almost over a decade now. I am the author of Deceived and The Manor. You can find both the uh, books on my website, verbatikmedia.com. I'm not sitting here right now with the books because I showed them in the last session and I just thought because I have something special to share today, so that's why I didn't get them. So I'm the author of Deceived and The Manor. Thankfully, Deceived has received a lot of love from the community, and I've been successfully able to build a very small circle of dedicated fans for Deceived. And it always makes me happy because that's what an author really wants, right? So The Manor was released this year itself, and people are still reading it. And because of some Amazon glitch, the book has gone up on Amazon now almost 4 months after its release. So that was a big setback. But now that the Amazon page is up and running, I hope more people will be able to read it now. Then I'm a publishing consultant. Uh, Through my company, Verbatik Media, I help authors pursuing the right path for their novel, whether it's traditional publishing or self-publishing. I help authors with both. For traditional publishing, I help them by preparing the proposals for their manuscripts. Sorry, I have to keep an eye on the phone as well, for the comments and whatever activities going on the group as well. So I'm just going to be keeping that in my line of sight. But yes, so I help authors prepare proposals and query letters and approaching publishers, traditional publishers. And for self-publishing, I guide them through the entire process. And my company is also starting to provide self-publishing service from next year. That is 2026. So I will be publishing books under Verbatik Media, others' books, and hopefully one day we'll be able to traditionally publish books. I hope Verbatik Media becomes that big that we are able to traditionally publish authors. But yes, for now, we will be self-publishing authors. And then I'm a writing coach. I have been teaching writing for almost, I think, 5, 6 years now. I did take a break in between because of health issues, because of my work stress. But I've resumed teaching again. I coach writers. But even in the small break that I had taken, I did coach writers uh, privately or in one-to-one classes. So even though I wasn't taking classes as a mentor for a group of people, I was mentoring individual writers in that time. So I've been teaching for almost 4, 5 years now, and writing is my passion. I love writing myself. I love teaching writing, and I love editing books. So this is about me. Now, the main question, and something that I always tell my students, that whenever you listen to someone's advice, always make sure that there is a very good reason that you're listening to their advice. So, practice what you preach, right? So, why should you listen to me? This is why. Because I have worked with more than hundreds of authors reviewing their books, critiquing their books, assessing their books, editing their books, developing their manuscripts, and then helping them in publishing books. So I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of authors in the last 11 years. I consider myself very lucky that I started off very early and in extreme early 20s, and that I was able to get so much exposure at a very young age in the field of my choice, which is a pretty unconventional field, especially for India. So I personally read more than 100 books every year. Actually, this year I've already read around 125 or 126 books, and I'm well on my way to finishing the year with maybe 150 books. But I've been reading consistently over 100 books every year for the last 10 years. So I've read thousands of books. I love reading and I consume books like I consume oxygen. And another reason for you to be listening to my advice is that I'm not just a very passionate writer, I'm also a trained writer. I've trained myself uh, in the craft of story writing, in writing a novel, in creative writing, in writing non-fiction, creative non-fiction as well. And I have pursued a lot of good courses. Uh, some of them were in writing, some of them were in literature. And I also love psychology. So I've also learned psychology. I've done psychology from Yale, and I've learned about philosophy and the art of persuasion, that is public speaking, and world literature, both ancient and modern, from Harvard. And I've also done a lot of courses from University of Queensland. and University of Michigan. And I'm again enrolling in another course at Yale. So I love learning and I keep on learning. And I'm also a fluent French speaker. So I love dabbling into French literature as well. So literature is my life. And that's why, and I've dedicated my entire life to literature. That's why you need to listen to me. I also have an award-winning novel to my name, Deceived, and I've just published The Manor as well. So that's another reason for you to be listening to me, to my advice, basically, when it comes to writing and completing your novel. Another good reason that I have, that I wanted to share with you all today is my upcoming book, The Art of Storytelling. It is a step-by-step guide to writing a novel. This is a book that has been in the works for almost 6 years now. And finally, I'm very close to finishing it. The cover, back cover, everything is done. Uh, I am looking, I think, at a January or February 2026 release. So the main purpose of my YouTube series, Writing Fundamentals, is that I wanted to help writers across India, especially, but also across the world, in learning the art of writing, storytelling, free of cost. Because I am very well aware that books on crafts are expensive and not everyone can buy them. And how many are you going to buy? How many books are you going to get, right? So that is why I've decided to do the entire YouTube series on it. And then I'll be publishing my book, The Art of Storytelling, which will literally be one book that you'll be needing if you want to write, especially for Indian writers, because we do not have anything like this in India. So this is my book. If you want to pre-book your copy now, then you can fill out the form. I'll share the link after the live ends. I'll pin the comment on the video, and I'll also share the link in the in the WhatsApp group. Uh, Another thing is, I'll be giving away a lot of copies of The Art of Storytelling to a lot of writers free of cost as a giveaway. So if you want to participate in the giveaway, then do check out that link as well. I'll be sharing that link too. Now, in case if you've missed the last live, it was the first episode of Writing Fundamentals YouTube live series, and it was on anatomy of a story. If you've missed it, that's completely okay because the YouTube lives are going to be saved as videos on my YouTube channel. So you can just go in the webinars uh, playlist or in the Writing Fundamentals 2025 series and watch that video today or tomorrow, whenever. I would suggest if you have not watched the video, then finish today's live and then go back and watch Anatomy of a Story. Now, moving forward, with the anatomy of a story or anatomy of a story, uh, I had given away a free uh, workbook, which is the story blueprint worksheet ebook. It's almost 1920 pages ebook, which I would highly suggest to new writers. Uh, I'm kind of keeping my lectures very light because I've already conducted in-depth lectures on writing, which are already present on my YouTube channel. So you can just go back to webinars and watch the lengthy 2 to 3 hours masterclass videos. But these are just videos that will be covering the basics for writers who really want to get started and for writers who are stuck in their manuscript somewhere or the other. So do download the story blueprint worksheet, and the most ideal way is to print it out and then fill it for one story. So you need the worksheet or the workbook that I've created one printout of the workbook for one story. Now, let us begin with today's live, that is building memorable characters. Now, in the first live, we've already spoken about the skeleton of the story, how stories are made. Now, today we are going to give it a little bit of flesh with characterization. Now, I'm not taking a full-blown live on characterization because characterization itself has so many components in it. And also because I've already conducted creating believable characters, and that entire workshop or webinar was of almost 2 hours, and it goes in length, dissecting a lot of characters, and it has a lot of character types and what they do and how they are created. So I did not want to repeat what I've already covered, so you can always go and watch that go back in my videos and watch that video. I will be sharing its link again in the description of this live, and it will be saved as a video. So you can watch that entire video, the entire webinar, and learn a lot about characterization from there. What today I really wanted to discuss was how to make your characters memorable. Now, when we finish a book, what exactly do we remember? Say 99% of the time. Very few times we remember the plot twists. The settings are almost, let's say, at 1 or 2%, because it's very rare that you can remember a setting long after the book is over. I do know a couple of names of books that had amazing settings and where settings acted as character itself. But in most books, in say about 98% of books, you do not remember the settings. And if we talk about writing, writing is something that is very rarely remembered. The easiest thing or the most common thing that we remember after finishing a story is a character. So, in today's session, we are going to be talking about how to build characters that readers will remember. Now, as I have already told you, I read over 100 books every year and have edited hundreds of manuscripts. The one consistent truth I've found is that a strong character can save a weak plot. But a weak character can totally ruin even a very, very excellent or very good plot. So that's why characterization is very important. Now we are going to see how we can make our characters memorable. Now, if we talk about character, a character is nothing but a made up person who somehow feels more real than many of the people we know in life. That's the power of a character. That's the power of good writing. Characters are how readers experience your story. They are the lens through which we see, feel, and interpret the world the author or you has created. Without characters, even the most brilliant plot becomes a hollow structure, which can be technically sound but will be emotionally vacant. So, let's now look at the 5 traits that make a character memorable. The 5 traits are relatability, emotional resonance, complexity, consistency, and voice, and transformation. Let's start with relatability. Relatability is also known as the mirror effect. Now, an unforgettable character connects with us because they mirror something universal. They remind us of who we are, or who we fear becoming, or who we desperately want to be. Relatability doesn't mean sameness. It's not about giving your readers a carbon copy of themselves, but it is about giving them recognizable emotions. Readers might never live in Middle Earth, or attend Hogwarts, or maybe fight a dystopian regime, but they know what it feels like to be scared, lonely, unwanted, or brave against impossible odds. That's why we love Frodo Baggins. He is hands down one of my most favorite characters in the history of literature. I love Frodo Baggins. But more than Frodo, I love Bilbo Baggins. Bilbo Baggins is the most amazing character there ever been. I love Bilbo Baggins so much that I have named one of my cats after him. Now, anyway, coming back to Frodo, uh, Frodo Baggins is not powerful. He's not even particularly special. He's small, he's frightened, and he's very ordinary. But he carries the world's burden with resilience. And that ordinariness makes his character timeless. Or take Elizabeth Bennet, for example. We may not live in Regency England, but we all know what it's like to be misunderstood, to have our pride wounded, or to misjudge someone we later admire. And then there's Charlie from The Perks of Being a Wallflower. I love that book. I love Charlie. I actually love all the characters in the book. But Charlie, particularly, is introverted, awkward, and unsure of his place in the world. Every sensitive teenager has lived a piece of his life. And that's why readers of every generation rediscover that book and see themselves in Charlie. Relatability is the emotional truth. It's something that ties a reader's real world to the author's fictional one. So when you're building your characters, ask yourself, what truth or what emotional truth lives inside my character, especially the main character, the protagonist, and what emotion can bridge their world with mine. Now, let's move on to the second trait, that is complexity, which is also known as the paradox principle. Real people are full of contradictions. They can be kind as well as cruel. They can be brave yet terrified. They can be certain but also confused. Sometimes in the same moment. Characters must mirror this contradiction if they are to feel alive. And these contradictions are what make a character complex. A one note character is like a cardboard cutout. The character may look like a person, but the character won't have any depth or surprise or any kind of relatability if they won't have complexity or contradiction. Now, the best example for this is Severus Snape from Harry Potter. He's cruel, he's bitter, and he's almost sadistic at times. And yet, when the truth of his love and sacrifice is revealed, every single reader feels a tidal wave of emotion. We feel guilt and admiration and sorrow. Why? Because we realize he was both a villain as well as a hero. He was both a shadow as well as a light. Another example is Jay Gatsby. He is a man who seems dazzlingly confident, but is, in truth, very fragile, delusional, and built entirely on longing. His contradictions of wealth and emptiness and charm and deceit are what make him so magnetic. Another unforgettable example is Heathcliff, one of another one of my favorite characters from Wuthering Heights. He is monstrous, vengeful, and even abusive. And yet, every line in the book burns with passion and pain. We despise him, but we understand him. And that makes him so memorable. In modern literature, Amy Dean from Gone Girl, she is manipulative, brilliant, both victim and the architect of a suffering. She is extremely unsettling and she is so memorable because of her complexity of character. Complexity means that your character doesn't fit neatly into boxes. They can be right and wrong. They can be noble and selfish, all at once. Remember, a complex character doesn't always make the right choices. They make relatable choices. They make choices that the reader might make. Now, here's a little bit of an advice. When you write your characters or when you work on your characters, ask yourself, what does my character show the world and what is it that they're hiding from the world? The tension between these two selves is where memorability is born. Now, the third trait is emotional resonance. Characters don't live in our minds. They, of course, live in our hearts. And the way they get there is through emotional resonance. Emotional resonance is that inexplicable ache when you read about someone's suffering or triumph. It's when you feel what they feel without being told. Now, remember, that is the key. You can try to tell the reader all you want about a character's misery, but it is only when you are able to show that misery that the reader will be able to feel it. We'll be covering the topic of showing and telling later in our lives, but this is a very important point, so do make a note of it, please. Let's take Atticus Finch from To Kill a Mockingbird as an example here. He doesn't deliver fiery monologues. His strength is very silent, measured, and it's extremely moral. He is unforgettable because his integrity resonates with our need to believe that good still exists. Or, sorry, Celie from The Color Purple. Her journey from voicelessness to empowerment touches something very raw and universal, and that is the need to be seen, heard, and valued. If we talk about nonfiction, Anne Frank is unforgettable because her hope outshines her horror. She embodies the resilience of being a human. She's a real child whose optimism completely humbles us. And think about Chief Bromden in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, a silent observer, half invisible until the end when he finally claims his freedom. That act hits us harder than any explosion or battle scene ever could. Readers don't remember descriptions, they always remember emotions. So instead of asking, what does my reader see in any particular scene, you need to ask yourself, what does the reader feel in this moment? And if you are able to nail this, trust me, your writing will transcend to an entirely different level. Emotional resonance often comes from vulnerability. So, the moment a character drops their guard, say when the superhero admits that he's scared, or when the stoic man cries alone, or when the villain remembers his lost childhood, that's where this kind of connection happens. So remember to let your character show his vulnerability to the reader. Again, do not tell his vulnerability, show his vulnerability. Now, moving on to the fourth trait, consistency and voice. Just 1 second, I need to have water. Consistency and voice. Every unforgettable character has a voice. It's not just how they speak, but how they see the world. It's basically their perspective, their thoughts, their ideas, and everything that makes them them. A character's voice is like a fingerprint, right? It's the rhythm, the tone, and their worldview that makes a character instantly recognizable. Consider Holden Caulfield from The Catcher in the Rye. He's sarcastic, cynical, and yet oddly tender. His voice is so distinct that you could open the book to any page and know it's him speaking. That sharp blend of disillusionment and vulnerability is why generations of teenagers have said, I can connect to him. That's me. Let's take Elizabeth Bennet again. Her dialogue sparkles with wit, irony, and a fierce sense of self. Her voice is not just about how she speaks, it's how she thinks, how she interprets everyone around her. Then there's Patrick Bateman from American Psycho, one of the best stories ever. Patrick Bateman is chilling, extremely detail obsessed. And that kind of detail obsessed narration reveals his sociopathy or psychopathy more than his actions ever could. Through his voice, we see a world that is stripped bare of empathy. Then another example is Scout Finch, the narrator of To Kill a Mockingbird. He is unforgettable, memorable because of her childlike clarity, exposes the absurdity of adult prejudice. Her innocence becomes the story's moral compass. So you see how voice and consistency in that voice is one of the major traits that's going to make your character extremely and exceptionally memorable. When your readers can recognize a character's voice in a single line, you've achieved something completely magical. Now, this can be achieved by giving your characters opinions, letting them interpret things their way, and that would mean letting them misinterpret things. Then Let their inner monologue bleed into the narration, but remember, do not overdo it at all, because then it will be telling and not showing. Remember, the voice isn't about the vocabulary or the syntax, it is about perspective. It's the emotional lens through which your reader experiences the story. Now, let's talk about transformation, the fifth trait that will be making your character extremely memorable. What truly etches a character into memory is transformation. The sense that they've been somewhere emotionally, morally, or spiritually. We love to watch people change or maybe refuse to change because transformation mirrors life itself. The best and the most common example for transformation is Ebenezer Scrooge from A Christmas Carol. His change from a miser to a benefactor is very simple, but it is emotionally perfect. He reminds us that redemption is possible. Then there's Macbeth. He gives us the opposite of what Ebenezer Scrooge goes through. Macbeth is a man corrupted by ambition. His descent is horrifying but irresistible. Then there's Zuko from Avatar, The Last Airbender. He is one of the best modern transformation arcs. He's angry, wounded, and desperate for approval. And his journey from villain to hero feels extremely earned because it is painful, it is slow, and it is exceptionally emotional. Even Raskolnikov from Crime and Punishment, or in Crime and Punishment, his transformation is not about forgiveness, but it is about awakening. His guilt consumes him until confession becomes his salvation, even though it was the confession comes from an external prompt. Then we have, again, Elizabeth and Darcy. Their dual evolution from pride and prejudice to humility and understanding remains one of literature's most satisfying emotional resolutions. A good arc, the transformation arc I'm talking about, a good arc doesn't have to be always redemptive. It just has to be revelatory. Either the character changes or they teach the reader something about the cost of not changing. Right now, I was just thinking about the Count of Monte Cristo. Very long book, but that's what it teaches the reader, right? How being so vengeful can completely destroy a person. So this is how good characters are. Hmm. But when we talk about transformation, you need to think of it as a circle rather than a straight line. The character returns to where they began, but they see the same thing differently. That shift in perception is what makes for real transformation. So, what makes a character unforgettable or memorable? It is definitely not perfection. It is definitely not how good they are, or how beautiful they are, or how genius they are, or how heroic they are. It's how true they are. The truth of emotion, of contradiction, and of fear and desire is what makes a character memorable. It's the way a character reveals something about us, about the reader. When we see ourselves reflected in the character's triumphs and failures, when their heartbreak feels like ours, when their growth mirrors our own journey. That's when they step off the page and become immortal. Readers don't remember what happened, they remember who it happened to. So build your characters as though they are real people. They should be flawed, they should be fragile, and they can be magnificent. And they'll never be forgotten by the reader if you are able to execute all these five traits into the characterization. Now, let's move on to the art of balancing flaws and strengths. Whenever we start writing about a character or a character, we start developing a character, almost always everyone tries to create the perfect character. I've edited so many manuscripts, and whenever I read a manuscript in its early stages, the biggest problem is that either the character is completely perfect or they are entirely flawed. And that is a huge problem. Most of the time, the characters are extremely perfect. Now, let's discuss how either of those two things are not good for characterization and how you can find a good balance between the two. Perfect characters will bore your readers. When we first start writing, many of us just try to create this ideal protagonist, right? And the ideal protagonist would be kind and beautiful and brave and clever and everything that the writer or we wish to be. But the problem is that perfection creates distance, it will alienate your reader. Readers connect through struggle, not success. Think about it. Would you rather follow Superman's journey, Superman, who is invincible and always right? Or would you rather follow the Hulk or Tony Stark's journey? Now, Tony Stark is brilliant, arrogant, he's flawed, and he's constantly learning humility, but the hard way. That's why we like following the journey of Tony Stark. We remember Tony because he fails, because his flaws create conflict and his strengths pull him back from ruin. For example, Superman may be inspiring, but he's rarely relatable. Iron Man, on the other hand, is driven by ego and fear of failure, and that vulnerability grounds his genius. Now, readers never care about how perfect your characters are, but they always care about how much they risk breaking. Let's look at how flaws make your characters feel real. Flaws aren't some kind of traits that you can sprinkle over your character. And they certainly do not make your character interesting in that way. Flaws are actually psychological wounds. And every psychological wound needs context. These flaws or psychological wounds are what shape how your character sees the world. A good flaw stems from fear, insecurity, or need. It's born from pain, not design. For example, Elizabeth Bennet's pride keeps her from seeing Darcy's true nature. Her flaw creates tension, misunderstanding, and then growth. Without her flaw, there will be no story. tragic, and unforgettable. Then there is Anakin Skywalker. Again, one of my favorite characters. In case of Anakin Skywalker, his fear of loss turns into obsession and ultimately into evil. Darth Vader. The same love that makes him human becomes his downfall. Let's just take a moment to feel or recollect Darth Vader's entire journey. After watching the movies, I was so inspired to write a fanfic on it, but I hate fanfic. I'm sorry if any of you writes fanfic. It's actually good, but I am not into it. But I was so taken by Anakin's character that I really wanted to write a redemptive story for him, you know. So this is how good characters are. They move you. They move you from your core. And you know, it's always the flaws that move you. It is never their perfections or their goodness or their kindness. It's always those negative traits, the wounds, the psychological wounds, because that's what we have as humans, and that's what we can connect to very easily. Now, coming back to the lecture, your character's flaw is often the shadow of their greatest strength. It's two sides of the same coin. Ask yourself what emotion drives a particular flaw. If it's jealousy, does it come from fear of abandonment? If it's pride, does it hide insecurity? Layering. Remember, you need to layer the flaws as well. Flaws make your character unpredictable, but they must still feel earned. Now, we've seen we've seen how flaws can help you make your character seem more realistic, but let's see how strength can make the readers root for your characters. So now let's look at the flip side, the strengths. A character's strengths are what makes us admire or root for them. They are the qualities that help them survive conflict and give us hope. But strengths without flaws feel artificial. A strong trait becomes compelling only when it's tested by a flaw. For example, Harry Potter's courage is admirable, but it's his loyalty, which is sometimes reckless, that both saves and endangers his friends. Hermione's intelligence is her strength, but it also makes her bossy, anxious, and often frustrated with others. Walter White's intelligence in Breaking Bad is his greatest gift, but his pride transforms it into self destruction. Daenerys Targaryen's compassion makes her liberate cities, yet her moral absolutism turns that compassion into tyranny. A strength that never creates problem is not strength. It's convenience for the author. And we are not looking for convenience while writing. Show how your character's strengths can backfire. For instance, kindness becomes naivete. Courage turns into recklessness, or love can become obsession. That's when the characters become interesting. Now, let's look at this duality where flaws and strengths intersect. Every unforgettable character lives at the intersection of two forces, their inner strength and their fatal flaw. Think of it as a push and pull. Their flaw pushes them toward conflict, but their strength pulls them back toward redemption. And the story exists in the space between these two. For example, Sherlock Holmes. His intellect is unmatched. That's a strength. But his arrogance isolates him, which is a flaw. Every story explores the tension between a strength and a flaw. Jo March in Little Women is fiercely independent, which is a strength, but she is impulsive and proud, which is a flaw, which are flaw. In case of Heathcliff, his love is deep and it is his strength, but it curdles into cruelty when rejected, which is a very major flaw. That contradiction makes him unforgettable even in his monstrosity. Then there's Hamlet. He's intelligent and introspective, which are strengths, but his indecision, which is a flaw, causes tragedy. He knows what must be done, but cannot act. And when he ache because we understand, and we ache because we understand that paralysis. Your readers will forgive your characters for their flaws, as long as they see that their strengths are trying to win. So draw a line down your notebook and on one side list your character's strengths and on the other side list their flaws and then try to connect them. How does each strength feed into a weakness? For example, ambition turns into greed. Loyalty can turn into blind faith. Love can turn into possessiveness. Honesty can turn into cruelty. The interplay between these is what will make your character feel real and memorable. Now, there is a way of turning weakness into empathy. This is very important. Flaws shouldn't make readers hate your characters. They should make readers understand your characters. Empathy doesn't mean forgiveness, it means comprehension, understanding, feeling the same thing as the character feels and understanding them better. When we understand why someone is broken, we care about them, even if we disagree with what they do and how they do it. For example, Joe Goldberg in You, he is manipulative and violent, yet his loneliness and obsession makes him disturbingly relatable. Raskolnikov from In Crime and Punishment, he's a murderer, and yet his crushing guilt makes us feel for him. Nina Sayers in Black Swan is a perfectionist to the point of madness, but every artist understands her hunger for power, for approval. Readers don't need to like your characters, they just need to understand them. Once they understand, they'll follow your character anywhere, even into darkness. When writing a flawed action, show the emotion behind it. Readers may not condone it, but they'll connect to it if they can trace the reason. Now, when you build a character, don't make them perfect. Make them believable. Give them a flaw that hurts them and a strength that redeems them. Let both coexist, fight, and evolve. Because the tension between the flaw and the strength, the light and the dark, is where the human aspect of your character will lie. The relatability and the emotional aspect will lie. A character without flaws is fiction. A character with both flaws and grace is truth. So, we need to go with the truth. Now, let's talk about three very important pillars, I would say, of characterization for creating a memorable character: motivation, inner conflict, and growth arc. First, let's look at motivation. Okay, before that, let me just have water and then give you a little introduction for the topic. Every memorable story is not about what happens to a character. It's about why it happens and how it changes them. And that's where these three pillars come in: motivation, conflict, and growth. Motivation is why your character acts. Conflict is what stands in their way. And growth is who they become because of it. Why, what, who? Motivation, conflict, and growth. I'll just repeat this in case if you are taking notes, which I really want you all to take, then make a note of this, please. Motivation is why your characters acts. Conflict is what stands in their way, and growth is who they become because of it. Without these three, a story becomes a series of disconnected events. But with these three, motivation, conflict, and growth, your story becomes a well rounded journey that will mirror itself. Now, let's talk about first motivation. Let's start with a question that every writer must be able to answer for every character. Why are they doing this? Every believable character has a clear, emotionally grounded motivation. It may not be noble, it may not even be conscious, but it has to exist and the author needs to know it. Now, there are two types of motivations, or if you would like to call them layers, because we need both. We don't just need external motivation, we need internal motivation as well. So that's why we'll be calling them layers. So there are two layers of motivations: external and internal. External motivation is what they think they want. External motivation is what your character thinks they want. It is a visible, tangible goal. For example, Katniss Everdeen wants to survive the Hunger Games. Now, internal motivation is what your character actually needs. It is the emotional or psychological truth beneath the goal. For example, Katniss wants to survive the Hunger Games, but Katniss needs to reclaim agency and protect the ones she loves. So, want and need. And that too, what the character think they want and what they really need. The external goal keeps the plot moving, and the internal motivation. The external motivation keeps the plot moving, and the internal motivation keeps the reader caring and invested in your character. For example, Frodo Baggins wants to destroy the ring, external motivation, but he needs to overcome his own fear and temptation, which is internal motivation. Jay Gatsby wants Daisy, which is an external motivation. But he truly craves validation and identity, which is internal motivation. Michael Corleone in The Godfather wants to protect his family. It is an external motivation. But what he really needs is freedom from its corruption, which is an internal motivation. So, your plot is kind of the map that we are going to be following, which we learned in the first slide. The motivation is going to be the fuel for that plot. Without motivation, every action of your character and thus every plot point will feel artificial and mechanical. It is the difference between watching someone move and understanding why they move. That is why we need motivation. Now, here's a quick tip. Please make a note. When defining your character's motivation, ask yourself 4 questions. What do they want? What do they, sorry, what do they want? Why do they want it now? What are they willing to sacrifice to get it? And what fear drives that want? Often, the truest motivation hides beneath fear. Fear of failure, fear of loss, fear of being unseen. That fear is what will make even the most heroic characters feel relatable. For example, in Finding Nemo, Marlin's motivation seems to be to find his son, but his real motivation is to conquer the fear of losing the people he loves. It's not a rescue story, it's actually a story of letting go, right? Now, let's move on to the second important pillar, that is conflict. Again, in conflict also we have 2 layers, internal and external, especially when it comes to characters. Now, these 3 things are actually apply to the entire plot as well, but right now we'll be focusing a little bit more on character wise. So, if motivation gives the direction to your character and the plot, conflict gives it tension. It is the resistance that forges transformation, and transformation is everything in a story. Conflict is not just fights and battles, it's about friction, as we saw in Anatomy of a Story. The difference between what your character wants and what the world wants, or their own heart wants or demands. Now, again, there are 2 types or 2 layers of conflict, external and internal. External conflict is the visible struggle, the obstacles, the enemies, the society, or fate. For example, Harry versus Voldemort, Elizabeth Bennet versus class and social norms. Internal conflict is the invisible struggle that your character goes through with fear, guilt, self doubt, and identity crisis. For example, Hamlet's indecision, Tony Stark's arrogance versus vulnerability. The beauty of great storytelling lies in the way external and internal conflicts mirror each other. For example, Ahab in Moby Dick. Externally, he's chasing the whale. Internally, he's consumed by obsession. In Jane Eyre, externally, she struggles against class and gender expectations, but internally, she wrestles with her moral integrity. Walter White, externally, he's fighting for control and money, but internally, it's pride, a desperate need to matter. External conflict moves the story forward, and internal conflict moves the reader's heart. Again, same as motivation. Now, let us quickly see how motivation and conflict interact. Imagine a loop. Motivation pushes your characters towards a goal, conflict pushes back. Each clash reveals something about who your character is. And this push pull will add a lot of tension and momentum to your story. And actually, it will help us gain a very good fiction curve in the story or in a particular segment of a story. But yes, this is how the loop will work. Motivation will push your character towards a goal, conflict will push them back, and each clash will reveal something about who the character is. For example, in the Hunger Games, Katniss's motivation is to protect her sister, but it clashes with external conflict, that is, the Hunger Games, and her internal conflict, that is, her mistrust of others. Every decision she makes deepens our understanding of Katniss's character. In short, think of conflict as the test that will expose the truth about your character. It's what peels away every illusion until only the core of your character remains. In order to strengthen conflict, ask yourself two questions. What happens if my character fails? And what happens if they succeed? If both answers are emotionally charged, you have a real conflict. If even a single question out of the two is not emotionally charged, you do not have a good conflict or a real conflict. In Breaking Bad, if Walter fails, his family suffers. If he succeeds, he loses his soul. That's the perfect narrative tension, and that's what makes the Breaking Bad one of the best TV series ever. Now, let's look at the third pillar, growth. Growth is what makes a character unforgettable. It's the emotional payoff for everything we've invested in them. A character's growth isn't always positive, but it must be inevitable. Every choice, every failure, every conflict should lead them to a point of self realization. Now, there are three classic arcs of growth: positive arc, negative arc, and flat arc. In positive arc, the character overcomes their flaws and become wiser. For example, Scrooge in A Christmas Carol and Zuko in Avatar. Negative arc is where the character is destroyed by their flaw. For example, Macbeth and Michael Corleone. Now, a flat arc is the character that stays constant but transforms the world around them. For example, Wonder Woman, Spider Man, Atticus Finch. Think of the growth arcs as emotional geometry. It shows us the shape of your character's soul. Now, motivation, conflict, and growth. This is a cycle. So they do not stand alone. They are a part of a cycle. Motivation leads to conflict. Conflict forces growth. Growth then redefines motivation. And this is how the story keeps on moving forward. Now, let's take an example for this. In Pride and Prejudice, Elizabeth's motivation is self respect and freedom. Her conflict is pride, which is internal, and class, which is external. Her growth is realizing that humility doesn't mean submission. By the end, her motivation changes or transforms. It is no longer about independence, but about mutual understanding. Now, in The Godfather, Michael's motivation begins with love for his family, then conflict, both external, mafia, and internal, moral decay, consumes him. His growth is negative, that is tragic. He becomes what he once despised. Character arcs are not linear, they are circular. Your protagonist ends where they began, but they see it differently. Now, I'm going to give you a quick writing exercise that you can practice in order to make sure that you have a good cycle of motivation, conflict, and growth. You need to answer 4 questions. The first one is, what does my character want externally? What do they need internally? Third, what stands in their way? That is conflict. And fourth, what truth will they discover by the end? That is their growth. Uh, let's take an imaginary character here. Let's say a detective who's obsessed with solving a case because she believes justice will bring her peace. Okay? But what she really needs is forgiveness for failing someone years ago. The conflict, that is the case, forces her to confront her inner wound. Her inner wound. Her growth happens not when she solves the case, but when she forgives herself. Now, so far we've built on how we've understood or we've learned how we can make our characters feel real, and we've learned about how we can make them feel flawed and emotionally alive. Now we've added a pulse to the character, that is motivation, conflict, and growth. Okay, so these three are the invisible threads tying your character's inner world to the plot or the outer world. Now, without motivation, conflict, and growth, that is MCG, your story may move, but it will never feel real or emotionally resonant or relatable. Because readers don't just want to know what happens, they want to understand why it matters and why it happens and why it even matters. A well written story changes its reader, but a well written character changes both the reader and themselves. Now, let's move on to the next topic: ways to make readers feel deeply for your characters, even when they are unlikable or even the flawed ones. Now, here's something I say often to my students: you don't have to make your characters likable, you have to make them understandable. Likability is shallow, it's fleeting, but understanding builds empathy, and empathy creates emotional memory. Readers will forgive your character's cruelty, selfishness, or mistakes as long as they understand why they did what they did. And this, to me, is the highest form of storytelling. Not making readers judge your characters, but helping them feel for the characters. But then it gives rise to the question, why do the readers need to feel? Every unforgettable story has one thing in common: emotional resonance. We don't cry because Dumbledore dies. We cry because of what he meant to Harry and therefore to us. We don't feel devastated when Anna Karenina throws herself under the train only because she dies. We feel it Because we watched her spiral, trapped by choices, love, guilt, and a society that offered her no escape. The act of dying isn't what moves us, it's the emotional truth behind it. Her loneliness, her desperation, basically her humanity. So, as writers, your job is not just to make readers weep, it is to make them care, and then it will matter. And to care, readers need access to your character's internal thought process, your internal, basically the inside of your character. They need to be in the heart and mind and soul of your character. Now, here's kind of a tip or a secret ingredient that will help you achieve it. And that is, we've already discussed it, but now we are going to discuss it with a couple of examples. Vulnerability. Vulnerability is what makes readers lean in and pay attention. It's the moment when the mask slips and we see the person beneath the facade. It doesn't have to be grand or dramatic. In fact, the smaller and quieter the vulnerability is, the more powerful it feels. For example, when Jane Eyre was trembling but defiant, and she says, I'm no bird and no net ensnares me. It's not just her strength, it's the years of pain turned into voice. Sorry. When Katniss Everdeen sings to Rue as she dies, there's no dialogue explaining the grief, but we feel it in the silence between her words. When Frodo finally admits to Sam, I can't do this, Sam, that single line captures the exhaustion of every human struggle. Vulnerability is the bridge between character and reader. It's the place where truth lives, and readers recognize that truth instantly. The moment your character admits something they don't want to admit to themselves or to others, that's when the reader's hearts open. Now, let's look. I have include. I know that our time is almost over because I keep only 15 minutes up, but I really want to discuss a couple of more things. Let me just see where we are in our topic. So we are on topic number 4 right now, and I have a total of 5 topics. So we'll be completing the entire thing. So I wanted to include this little session or a little section on the philosophy of empathy. Because empathy doesn't come from perfection, never. It comes from recognition. Readers empathize with pain they recognize. Even if the circumstances are extraordinary, they will always they will always empathize with something they recognize, especially pain. Think of Joe Goldberg from Hugh, a manipulative stalker, yet his loneliness and self justification feels disturbingly familiar. We don't condone him, but we understand him. And that makes him terrifyingly relatable. Or Raskolnikov from Crime and Punishment. He's a murderer whose guilt is so raw, so suffocating that we can't help but pity him. His internal torment makes him real. Even Severus Snape, for years readers hated him, and yet when his truth is revealed, the collective world sobbed for him. Because all along behind the cruelty there was love. Readers can't love what they don't understand. But once they understand, love becomes inevitable. That's why empathy matters so much. Now, I'll share a couple of techniques that will help you build empathy. My alarm just went off. Okay. I'm going to be taking another 15-20 minutes of your time, so please bear with me. Let's look at the techniques for building empathy. First is interiority. It is basically what I was talking about, that the reader needs to get into the heart and mind and soul of your character. And that heart and mind and soul is basically the interiority inside of your character. Let readers into your character's private world, the thoughts they would never say out loud. Show us the hesitation before the lie, the guilt after the betrayal, the relief that feels wrong. For example, in The Kite Runner, Amir's guilt is so palpable, not because of what he does, but because of the thoughts he cannot silence afterwards. Interiority creates intimacy. It makes the reader complicit. We are not observing anymore. We are inside the characters. Don't tell readers what your character feels. Let them overhear it. Now, small emotional moments. Small emotional moments go a big way when it comes to building empathy. The big emotional scenes are actually easy to write. You can show your characters crying or shouting or maybe dying. But what truly breaks the reader's hearts are the little gestures. For example, when Atticus Finch gently puts his arm around Scout during the trial, a wordless promise of safety in a cruel world. When Remus Lupin hesitates before shaking hands with Harry, afraid his touch will be rejected. Or when Chief Bromden finally lifts the control panel in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. It was not for power, it was for freedom. These small acts, a hand on the shoulder, a smile in grief, a breath before courage, a little hesitation before a big step, that's where the readers will feel empathetic. Let your characters feel human in the spaces in between your sentences. That's where the magic hides. Then there is showing contradictions, not just in the belief system or in the thinking process of the characters, but also in the way they are. People are messy. They can be tender and cruel in the same scene, showing duality. For example, Heathcliff, even as he seeks revenge, he grieves for Kathy's ghost. For another example, let's take Amy March. Childish and vain, yet burns Joe's manuscripts out of pain, not evil. Walter White kisses his baby with genuine love right after committing murder. That's what makes your readers conflicted. And emotional conflict is always equal to emotional involvement. A contradiction is a sign of depth. When a reader can't decide whether to love or hate your character, you've done your job. Now, give the readers, I think this is the second last point for empathy, for building empathy. Give them a reason, not an excuse. Readers will forgive almost anything if they understand why. A reason doesn't justify a crime or a betrayal, but it gives context. For example, Anakin Skywalker turns into Darth Vader not because he's evil, but because he's terrified of losing the people he loves. Cersei Lannister is monstrous, yet her every cruelty comes from her fear of powerlessness. The Joker, Heath Ledger's version, has no backstory we can verify. And that's why he frightens us. He's empathy inverted. I'll just let that sit for a second. Reason is empathy's compass. It doesn't forgive the action, it just explains it. The last way you can build empathy is to let your characters lose. Readers bond most deeply when they watch a character lose something. Whether it's love, pride, family, faith, or self belief. A loss will expose truth, and emotional truth is what we are looking for all along. Jo March losing Beth shows her the fragility of independence. Daenerys losing her dragon's innocence mirrors her own moral decay. And Jay Gatsby's loss of illusion before he loses his life is what causes the heartbreak. Loss is always like a mirror in storytelling. It shows us what mattered all along. A character who has lost something is open, and in that openness, readers can step inside. Now, let's talk about how to make an unlikable character or a bad character feel realistic. You can make readers care about villains too. If you show the humanity inside the horror or the humanity behind the vileness. For example, Killmonger in Black Panther is a revolutionary villain, but his rage is born from generational pain and injustice. Hannibal Lecter, he's monstrous, yes, but intellectually magnetic. We admire the sharpness even as we recoil from what he thinks and what he does. The Phantom of the Opera, his violence comes from isolation, longing, and rejection, and that's why we pity him. When you write darkness with empathy, you show readers that even monsters were once children who weren't loved enough. If you want to make readers feel for a villain, try to show two things: the origin of their wound and the moment they could have chosen differently but didn't. And of course, why. That's where tragedy lives, and that's what will make your villains relatable, if not likable. Now, another thing is expressing emotion through subtext. Subtext is what your character feels but doesn't say. It's the invisible current under dialogue and action. We will be talking more about subtext when we'll be covering dialogue later in the live series. But for now, just remember that subtext happens between dialogue and action. For example, in Atonement, Cecilia and Robbie's letter exchange carries layers of fear, shame, and longing. None of it openly stated. In The Remains of the Day, Stevens's restraint is his heartbreak. Sometimes silence screams louder than words. And this is something that very few writers understand. When your readers know what the character can't say, that's when you've truly made them feel and understand your character. So, how do we make readers feel for our characters? Even the flawed ones, we give them truth. Not goodness, not perfection, just plain, simple truth about the character. Truth is how the readers love, sorry, Truth is how the character love, fail, hide, and how they hurt. Because emotion isn't about what happens in the story, it's about what happens inside the character while the story unfolds. A well written scene makes us see, a well written character makes us feel, but a relatable character, a flawed, raw, and vulnerable character makes us remember. And that's what we are talking about today. So, write your characters with compassion, not to excuse their darkness, but to illuminate it. Because even when your readers close the book, empathy keeps the story alive. Now, let us move on to the last section of today's live, that is my very own 5D character framework. When I'm editing manuscripts, I can usually tell within the first few pages whether the author truly knows the characters or not. And that is why I always ask for sample chapters whenever I'm accepting a project for editing. Some writers describe, but others understand their characters. And that difference is everything. Most authors build their characters in 2D, what they look like and what they do. But real people live in 5D, not even in 3D. The 5D or the 5 dimensions are physical, psychological, emotional, social, and moral or spiritual. If you can explore your characters through all 5 of these dimensions, they will stop being characters and start being people. So today let's talk about how to write people and not paper dolls. Okay, so the first dimension is the physical dimension. It is the most obvious dimension, the body, the way they move, the surface details, but it's not about beauty or fashion, it's more about embodiment. How a person's physicality reflects their history, habits, and inner life. For example, Tyrion Lannister in Game of Thrones, his stature shapes his entire worldview. He's learned to weaponize wit because the world mocks his body. In Jane Eyre, she's plain, small, quiet, but her posture and gaze convey moral strength far greater than her size. Gollum in Lord of the Rings, his deformity mirrors his internal decay. The body becomes the metaphor for corruption. And in case of Katniss Everdeen, her lean hunter's physique reminds us of survival and scarcity. It tells us her backstory before she even speaks. Don't describe your characters like passport photos. Describe them like the sum of everything they've endured. Focus on movement and gesture and not just the character's features. How do they walk? What happens to their face when they lie? What physical habits betray what they feel? If you want to work on the physical dimension, try this exercise. Describe your character entering a room. Don't mention what they look like. Describe how the room reacts to them. It's going to be very interesting. My old students will know what I'm talking about, but the new ones will actually have to try the exercise. You can share your exercises with me over email, rathorheena@gmail.com, or you can send it to me on WhatsApp, or you can share it in the comments if you're comfortable here. And I will definitely reply to each and every single one of the comment and message, DM, email, everything. That will tell you who they are physically and energetically. This exercise is actually pretty good. Now, let's talk about the second dimension, that is the psychological dimension. This is where the soul begins to take shape. Here, we deal with beliefs, fears, habits, and patterns of thought. The psychological dimension is your character's mental architecture. It tells you how they make sense of the world and how the world has shaped them in return. For example, in Hamlet, intellectual, analytical, paralyzed by thought, his psychology is tragedy. Lisbeth Salander in The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, trauma, genius, defiance. Her worldview is survival through control. For Sherlock Holmes, his psychology is obsessive, restless, addicted to logic. He has a mind that cannot rest in peace. For Jay Gatsby, delusional optimism, the psychology of denial and reinvention. Your character's psychology is the scar tissue of their past. Give your characters core beliefs, something that feels absolutely true to them, whether or not it actually is. For example, I'm unlovable. If I don't control everything, I'll lose everything, or love is weakness, or the world is cruel and I'll strike first, etc., etc. These beliefs will drive behavior more than reason ever will. For example, in Breaking Bad, Walter White's philosophy, sorry, psychology is built on one belief: I deserve recognition. Every decision he makes stems from that invisible wound. Ask yourself, what lie does my character believe about themselves? It'll be very interesting. The plot exists to make them face the truth. Now, let's move on quickly to the third dimension, that is emotional dimension. This is the dimension most often written superficially. Writers mistake emotion for drama. But emotion isn't about shouting or crying or being overly dramatic. It's about what's at stake for the character. For example, Celie in the color purple, emotion told through silence and endurance, her restraint becomes her power. In Elizabeth Bennet's character, her pride is emotional armor, her growth is learning vulnerability. In case of Chief Bromden, his muted emotion until liberation, and then the explosion of feeling at the end hits like thunder because of his prior restraint. And then Joe March, sorry, in case of Joe March, impulsive, passionate, every emotion she feels drives action. Even her regret is kinetic. Emotion is what happens on the surface. It's the pressure. Sorry, emotion is not what happens on the surface itself or only. It is the pressure building beneath it. To find emotional truth, locate the tension points in your novel. What does your character want to say but can't? When do they hold back tears and not shed them? What emotion do they judge themselves for feeling? In the remains of the day, Stevens never says he loves Miss Kenton, yet every withheld word is an act of love. The unsaid is often more powerful than the declared. Let your characters tremble, hesitate, look away. Readers will understand. Uh, I'll give you an exercise prompt here. Write a scene where your character apologizes without using the word sorry. You'll discover their emotional truth in the spaces between the words. Now, the fourth one is social dimension. No one exists in isolation, not even your most solitary characters. The social dimension defines your character's place in the world, how they are seen, judged, loved, or rejected. For example, Pip in Great Expectations. Defined by class, His social shame and aspiration drive the entire narrative. Elizabeth Bennet, constrained by gender and class, yet subverts both with wit and self-respect. Heathcliff, his fury is born of being an outsider, socially invisible yet emotionally volcanic. Your character's social reality isn't their background. It's the it's the pressure they live under. Now, in order to create the social dimension, ask yourself three questions. What social rules or systems shape your character? What's their relationship to power? Do they have it, want it, or resist it? Who defines their worth, themselves or others? And you'll get a very good social dimension. For example, in The Handmaid's Tale, Offred's emotional world exists entirely within the social cage of Gilead. Her rebellion is emotional before it's physical. Again, take an example prompt here. Write one paragraph describing your character from society's point of view and one from their own. The difference between the two is where the tension will be found. Now, the fifth dimension, the last part of our life today, moral and spiritual dimension, moral or spiritual dimension. This is the deepest layer, the moral and spiritual truth that guides your character's choices. It's not about religion, it's about values, ethics, conscience, and meaning. This dimension decides whether your character is capable of redemption or doomed to repeat their sins. For example, Batman, his moral code, I don't kill, defines his existence, yet constantly breaks him. Jean in Les Miserables, his journey from thief to savior is a spiritual rebirth. Macbeth loses his moral compass, ambition devours his soul. Pai Patel, life of Pai, his faith becomes both survival and sanity. Raskolnikov is tormented by guilt until he confesses, crime as a road to redemption. The moral dimension is where your character meets your own darkness. Every story asks a question of morality. What's the right thing to do for your character? What will it cost them to do it? And what will happen if they don't? For example, in The Godfather, Michael, or is it Mikhail? Michael begins with a moral compass but trades it for power. His tragedy isn't in what he does, it's in what he loses. That is his soul. Here's another exercise prompt for you. Write one scene where your protagonist must choose between what is right and what is easy. The choice they make defines the moral dimension of your story. Now, let us quickly see how the 5 dimensions interact. Now, the 5 dimensions that we've learned about are not separate compartments. They overlap and feed each other. The physical body carries the scars of the psychological past. The emotional reactions reveal moral choices. The social world creates pressure that tests spiritual beliefs. When all 5 dimensions align, your character will begin to breathe and feel real. For example, let's take Zuko, Avatar, The Last Airbender. His physical dimension is his scar is the map of his shame. Psychologically, belief that honor is equal to approval. Emotionally, he has fear of rejection. Social, a prince exiled, desperate for belonging. And for moral, his final redemption when he redefines honor for himself. That's 5D storytelling, layered, interconnected, and unforgettable. A 5D character is not just written, it is actually discovered. So, the more you work on your character, the more you're going to discover the truths about them. So, the next time you sit down to build a character, don't start with their hair color or favorite food. Start with interiority. Ask yourself, how does their body tell their story? What lies do they believe? What emotions do they hide? What cages them in society? And what moral truth must they confront? When you answer all five, you no longer have a character, you have a person. Stories are remembered for their people, and people are remembered for their depths. The 5D framework that I've shared with you here is from my book, The Art of Storytelling. And it is how we reach those depths. Depths. Now, let's take a moment and look at everything we've covered today. We started with what makes a character memorable or unforgettable, their humanity, their contradictions, and their voice. We then explored how flaws and strength coexist, how motivation fuels the journey, how conflict tests it, and how growth transforms it. And finally, we uncovered the 5D character framework, the five dimensions that make a character feel as real as you and me. Before you log off, I'm so sorry. Before you log off, I would just like to remind you that our next live will be on conflict. I will be talking about conflict in context of story as well as characters in my next live, which will be next Saturday at 11 in the morning. I've changed the timing to 11 in the morning now, IST. So do join me. Also, I will be sharing the link to my upcoming book, The Art of Storytelling, in which you will be getting this 5D framework in depth in it. So do check out the link and pre-book your copies, because the starting price of the book is going to be lower than the price that we'll be selling the book at, and because it's a craft book, it is going to be expensive, maybe around say 600 bucks. So this is your chance to book it for low. You do not have to pay now, you just have to pre-book it. Make a booking, you will be notified when the books will be available, and then you can make the payment at the cost, at a discounted cost, and then you will be receiving your copies. Also, you can alternatively, or maybe you can as well participate in the giveaway and get a chance to win a free copy of my book when it comes out in January or February. Now, before you log off, just give me 1 second. I want you to take a minute and think of your protagonist. Close your eyes if you can and ask your character, what do you want? Listen to the answer. What are you afraid of? What truth are you running from? And what would it take to forgive yourself? If you are able to hear or maybe come up with the answers to these questions, you already know your story's heart. Remember, characters are never written, they are discovered. Every time you write, you peel away a layer of their nature, and sometimes your own, maybe. The secret isn't to make your characters perfect, it is to make them honest, true. Because honesty is what readers fall in love with. If today's session helped you see your characters differently, don't forget to download the Character Blueprint workbook. Its link will be available as soon as the blog post containing the book goes up. It should happen by today evening itself. I will also be sharing a strengths and flaws chart and a motivation and conflict map. The link will be available on my blog, verbatikmedia.com/blog posts. And you'll find it in the description below as well after tomorrow. Also, don't forget to join our WhatsApp group, Writing Fundamentals YouTube live series, where I share links, updates, and free resources every Saturday. And make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel, Heena Rathore Pardeshi, because next Saturday we'll move from character to structure in conflict. Thank you for spending your Saturday morning with me. Keep writing, keep feeling, and remember, stories live through people, and people live through stories. Thanks a lot for watching. I'll see you all next week.